Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. Everybody's upset about Hillcrest High School, where you had 400 students rampaging about, and you had a teacher who all she did was post a pro-Israel message on Facebook, and they wanted to attack her, and it led to the rampage in the school. So with us right now is Tova Plaut. She is an educator, and she's also the founder of a group called the New York City Public School Alliance. They had a press conference to protest the treatment of Jewish teachers and this particular incident about anti-Semitism in the public schools. Tova, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. First of all, how safe an environment is it for Jewish teachers and or Jewish students in public schools today in general?
So, what we've found is that there's this insidious hate that's growing inside New York City public schools for Jews in particular and for marginalized minorities in general. And so New York City public schools are definitely facing this very large problem where it has been allowed to grow this in this bias. And it's been embedded in our classroom. So I would say we're in a tough spot right now. It's time for us to really speak up and change things.
It certainly is. And now, of course, the one that got a lot of attention was in Hillcrest. Are you in touch with the teacher who has not been identified in the media who they looked to attack her just because she posted something pro-Israel on Facebook? No, nothing to even with the classroom. Somebody found it online and 400 kids were rampaging, doing destruction and looking to attack her.
Yeah, to be clear, she did this in her personal time. It was just a profile picture that she had done nothing wrong. And she was targeted for an attack in her school. 400 children did riot in that school and put her at risk. There were posts online about executing her in the town square. She was definitely a target for something really scary. And we understood that this was something that was building in the system. I had met with the first deputy chancellor weeks before to give him evidence of embedded bias and Jewish hate and anti-Jewish culture, Jewish erasure. All of that is happening in our schools. I had met with him, and unfortunately, they didn't take the steps that were necessary to protect their students and their employees and their parents and stakeholders. This is something that really should have been, I felt that the administration should have been more forward-thinking. I was not the only person who met with administration. These things have happened in the past on smaller scales. Some of the other founders of New York City Public School Alliance have experienced attacks on their own, and the chancellor had given assurances that they would be safe and that this wouldn't happen and no other teacher would ever have to go through this. And then they've not returned any of our emails asking for repeated conversations, meetings to see how we can combat this Jewish hate that's happening in our schools.
Now, are you in touch with this particular teacher who was the victim of this 400 student rampage?
So she has chosen to have a lower profile, and so no, I have not been in touch with her. I did reach out to her. She really, from what I understand, because again, this is not firsthand knowledge, she was really trying to keep a low profile. And while you say she was not identified, the chancellor identified her 3 times during his press conference.
Was that surprising that he did that?
I don't know why he did it, but it does put her at a larger safety risk.
Because I know the New York Post didn't print her name, so just was
exactly
wondering why the chancellor chose to do so. But there's criticism of the chancellor that he really didn't speak up very strongly. And he said, well, he's reprimanding the ringleaders. Frankly, I spoke to Councilman Jim Gennaro. I would love to call for that every single student, all 400 of them that participated in this riot, should be censured, should be put on the permanent record, should be expelled.
The New York City public school system has a disciplinary guidelines. And it seems like that they're not necessarily always followed, right? There was also guidelines about walking out of school during the November 9th demonstrations, and there were no repercussions for anybody who did that. So, while there's this big talk, oftentimes there's no follow through. The talk is even weak. The chancellor started off really strong in his press conference the other day, right? We heard how he's not going to tolerate hate and violence in our schools, and then went on to give weak excuses for why these students were doing it. They didn't know, they're 14 and 15. They saw their friends doing something and they just joined in. Minimizing this type of activity in our schools, minimizing this is going to give license for people to do more, right? We didn't recommend anybody for the walkout, so now they had a riot in school. This is escalating.
No, it certainly is. Now, would you like to see the chancellor, I'm talking about Chancellor Banks, be relieved of his duties? Because he certainly didn't do a good job. He did a terrible job in this situation here.
There's a lot of things that he did wrong. And I think that there's a lot of conversation about where our leadership is going. I have some very strong demands from this leadership to ensure our New York City Public School Alliance has put out our demands into the press, and we spoke about them at our press conference. And these demands are really designed for systemic change, because regardless of who the administration is, whether it changes or not, systemic change has to come, and that's not going to come by just the change of one person.
Because what I understood, and by the way, it's leadership. If you had the chance to say, we're not going to tolerate this kind of behavior, every student that participates will be penalized. If you take such forceful line, he was seen to almost apologize for the kids. Well, they don't know. So that itself is problematic, because it doesn't send a strong message that we're not going to tolerate. That's why I mentioned about relieving. He may not be the right man for the job. His name may be Banks, but he's bankrupt when it comes to this. And there was a teacher who made an anti-Israel remark during the meeting that he had, and also wasn't censured. And he says he has free speech, except when it comes to attacking Israel, then everything is okay. Right,
and I think that's part of our struggle, is that there is not this proportionality, right? There's this expectation for one side and not for the other, that certain types of speech is allowed, but anti-Jewish speech is allowed, but not necessarily other speeches. I think that we have to really think really strongly about, how we define what is allowed, and that there's equity in how we react to these attacks. We are really focused on trying to force our organization. Our alliance is really focused on systemic change within our schools, because we understand that education starts at a very young age. New York City Public Schools start at the age of 3 now, and we have teachers that are embedding implicit bias in children from all ages. There have been articles in the newspaper. We need to make sure that our schools are free of hate, and that we are providing core aspects of Jewish cultural, ethnic, and religious identity in a positive manner, that we're talking about American Jewish heritage. I think a lot of people are not even aware that Jewish Heritage Month is no longer celebrated in the New York City public schools. It's never acknowledged anymore. And we have Jewish erasure. That's in our public schools in a city where 18%, I think it's 18% of the population is Jewish.
In the public,
how is that possible? Yeah, of the population of New York City.
But what about in the public schools? What's the percentage of Jews in public schools? Do we know?
I do not know.
Okay, I think percentage of Jews may be a little bit higher. Might be 20. Depends on.
It might be. I read the other day 18. It depends on which census we're looking at. But if I'm moderating a little bit on the low side. But if we're 18% of the population of the city, we should be represented in the educational system.
Is there a vast amount of Holocaust studies in the public schools, as far as you know?
So as you know, New York State Education Department has mandated Holocaust studies for all in high schools across the state, and there are, but it is certainly up to the discretion of the school of how they present present and what curriculum. As far as I know, I'm not an expert in this area, so I'd rather leave this to somebody else on my team who would.
I'm just curious now what they're teaching about Jews. They certainly don't teach about Israel and the holidays, or if they do,
no. And I mean, we're not even celebrating Jewish Heritage Month with, an email, right? And
now Jewish Heritage Month of May. Do they celebrate African American Heritage Month?
There is Black History Month. There is Asian Pacific Month. Yes, yes, both of those.
And nothing at all for Jewish Heritage Month.
I have not received any announcements or recognition of Jewish Heritage Month that I can recall in the 4 years I've been working.
This should be something that's brought up with the higher ups, including with the mayor. The Jewish Heritage Month is not celebrated. Then when the other ethnic groups are either all or nothing.
Right. And look, this contributes to Jewish erasure and anti-Jewish culture in our school systems.
Tova Plaut is our guest. She is an educator, the founder of the New York City Public School Alliance. In 1968, I think we started to see Jews being phased out of public schools. Jews were predominant in the public school system. You had the Brownsville, Oceanville riots, and the thinking was that Jews can't really educate blacks or other minorities, and you saw a shift of that. I don't know what the percentage is today, but do we have an idea of what the number of Jewish teachers are still in the public school system?
I think it really is dependent on what neighborhood you're in. I think that, in certain districts you'll see more, in certain districts you'll see it less. I don't have any statistics on that.
No, I'm just curious, because it would seem to me that you mentioned there's an erasure of Jewish education, or any semblance like Jewish Heritage Month, I think should be acknowledged in this. I'm sure they're aware of it. It's a whole month, and they don't even send an email. It's something which we should champion for.
Absolutely.
And also this hatred that exists, I don't know where it comes from. We have 400 kids just rampaging, looking to beat up, kill a teacher. It's just, I don't even have any words for it.
So for those of us who work in the system, unfortunately, we were not surprised.
Why?
Because we face hostile work environments quite regularly, with either coworkers or colleagues making comments that, from the small microaggression to the large, being attacked by students of 10 students attacking you, and then the administration doing nothing, or teachers reporting another teacher being anti-Semitic to them, and there's no follow through. There are so many instances of EEO reports that just go nowhere, which is the city's way, for an employee to report a discrimination, and there is not this universal, across the board equity and how they handle these situations. So when most of us have learned not to speak up and not to say anything, because it's not going to go anywhere, and it just makes your work environment a harder place to be.
Have you yourself experienced this kind of anti-Semitism, whether from a colleague or from students in the classroom?
So I will even tell you that on my second day there, I was asked a very inappropriate question about Jews, and it was a very.
For example.
I don't even have to give you an example. I can tell you exactly what I was asked. I was asked why Jews are so pushy.
And who asked you this question?
So I don't want to name her because she was a colleague of mine. A colleague of mine.
So the North, you're just on the job. They go, "Why are Jews so pushy?" It's like a natural conversation.
Right.
The first Jew that you see next to you, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was hopeful that it was in context of our work, right, and understanding cultural differences. That's what I was hopeful for. But as time goes on, at the time it was my second day working there. As time goes on, I recognize that these are just embedded biases that people have against Jews, and there's no counter education against it.
Which area of the city do you work in?
I work in Manhattan.
Manhattan. Manhattan's supposed to be more enlightened. I guess it depends which part of Manhattan. But you hear from your other colleagues that they also face this kind of.
Yes, and I want to be clear. The team that I work on is a very supportive. Right now, the team that I have is very supportive. I have great colleagues. This is not about them. This is more about understanding that my personal experience is a small one in comparison to what many others have faced, and yet it is a symptom of what happens in our system. Now, if we have people in our system who have these embedded biases and they're coming into their classrooms, or strong beliefs in which they think that their beliefs are correct, even if they're not factual, and they need to give this information over to their students, and they're giving this information over to the students of all ages, then this is something we need to address. And it doesn't come from an address. It's not going to be addressed by someone making an announcement and then not following through. It's going to be addressed by systemic change. And we have to institute trainings for teachers and educators and all staff across the city that includes anti-Jewish culture, and Jewish hate, so that we understand where it comes from and how to combat it. We've done it before for other minority groups too, and we've never done it. And Jews are always left out of those conversations.
But what do you teach in the school?
I'm an instructional coordinator, so I am an instructional coach for teachers in my district.
And how do you find overall working in the public school system? Is it something that you dread going to every day? Is it something that, because if people talk about the schools the way it is today, from the background of some of the kids, where it's dangerous in some of the schools, you need metal detectors to get in.
Yeah, so I'm very lucky because I work in the Division of Early Childhood. I love what I do. I've been in early childhood most of my career. And I, get to work with teachers who are working with young children every day. So I will not say that I have this same work environment as teachers who are inside of a specific school, because I support 16 schools. I think what you're asking is better answered by my colleagues who don't feel safe.
So tell us about you.
Some of them are on leave and not sure that they want to come back.
They're
Some of them are in schools and took transfers.
Is that they're on leave because of anti-Semitic incidents?
No, they might be on leave for something else, but then, do I want to come back? I have colleagues who have had safety transfers because of anti-Semitic instances in their school. I've had colleagues also who were not given a transfer, but just wound up looking for another job to see someplace where they were more comfortable. So, they are the educators across the city, the staff in New York City Department of Education, which is now called the New York City Public Schools, has, faced this. The Jewish employees are not the only ones that are facing this. Our students are facing this. I spoke with a parent who has 3 children in 3 different high schools, a Jewish parent, and all 3 are facing anti-Semitism today, and they're coming into school and being called baby killers. This is not an environment that should be allowed for any of our students in our schools.
No, it shouldn't be. Tell us about the organization you founded, New York City Public School Alliance. What does it do?
So New York City Public School Alliance started out as a grassroots organization. We were really just a few educators who came together through another forum and were frustrated by the lack of action. And one day I just decided, okay, we're creating our own WhatsApp group, and we're going to get together and we're going to organize and be able to take action on these things. And that has grown and grown and grown until we realized that we had to kind of organize. We have committees in our alliance right now. We have a writing committee, we have a social media committee, we have an education committee, we have a core group of educators who are working to keep all of that running, right? And it's all volunteer. This not, this really happened in the last few weeks. And I'm quite proud of it, because I'm really proud of the people that we've partnered with. And they are some of the most brilliant, thoughtful educators I have ever met, and extremely knowledgeable in the curriculum of where they're teaching, and have a deep understanding of what's happening in our schools. And this is really important. And we understand that this is really important because this is the next generation. These children, what they're learning and what they're internalizing inside our schools today is what leads us tomorrow, because they become our politicians, they become our teachers of tomorrow, they become the president, somewhere along the right. All of these people become leaders later. They're all going to be the next generation of leaders. And if we can't fix this now, this is not going to be healthy.
Now, I started mentioning earlier about how many Jewish teachers were. There used to be an organization called the Association of Orthodox Jewish Teachers, AOJT. I don't know if that still exists or what it's like. I'm sure there's probably a lot less Orthodox Jewish teachers in the system than there used to be 20, 30 years ago.
So Moshe Stern is, I believe, becoming the president of AOJT in January. He is a really great resource and helps a lot of teachers navigate some of the hassle work environments that we work with, such as, leaving early for Shabbos and anything else that might come up with. I know that he's worked with teachers who's faced anti-Semitism, and this is an incredible organization as well. And it is a union kind of facing organization, whereas New York, we complement each other is what I'm getting at. We're a good complement. One faces and advocates from regulation, and we're advocating from the educational point of view. How are we going to make systemic change in the system?
We got to get rid of the educational system that allows anti-Semitism to flourish. And we need to teach more about Jews. If 25% of New York is Jewish, the public school education has to reflect some of that, especially during Jewish Heritage Month. I didn't know about. We're going to take on that cause. I want to thank you.
Thank you. I just want to be clear that it's also in our curriculums. So we need to take that out of our curriculum. They add Jewish hate there's some embedding in there of Jewish
what curriculum has Jewish hate?
Some of the social studies curriculum. If you want to have a longer discussion about that, I would love to. I know that we're out of time, but I just want to be clear. It's not just about culture within the schools, that it is actually embedded in some of our teachers.
Quick example, what is being taught that's anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic?
So there are some books. I'm going to speak from the early childhood because that's my specialty. We have some books that are approved by the New York City Department of Education that have embedded biases in them against Jews. For example, there is a book that is where a young girl is coming to school. She comes from a socioeconomically depressed background, and she's afraid to share what she did for the summer. And there's only one Jewish girl in the book, and she's only mentioned once, and she spent the summer in Paris, where all the other children were going to the library or to the local beach or were home reading books. So that embeds implicit bias that all Jews are wealthy, all Jews, and this Jewish child is elevated on the page above the other children. So it kind of creates this oppressor versus oppressed view. And while if you know anything about education, these things matter because they embed in young children. So they may not even know why they have these feelings later, but they have them, and they are built into their life.
And that's what they can say Jews are pushy.
Yeah.
Anyway, Tova Plaut, I want to thank you for what you're doing and for really pushing against what's happening in Hillcrest High School, where 400 students rampaging, looking to do harm, maybe even kill a Jewish teacher for the crime of posting a pro-Israel message on Facebook. Tova is not only an educator, but the founder of the New York City Public School Alliance. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you. We'll be on tonight between 8 and 9 on 6.